This is Dialogue. Dialogue, a presentation of the Public Affairs and Special Events Department of KLRB News.
And this is another edition of Dialogue Conspiracy with political research specialist Mae Brussell. And sitting here acting like a fool for KLRB, this is Phil Kogan.
Who's the fool?
I don't know. Sometimes I
have
so much thrown at me in 1 hour that I'm not too sure whether one mind can stand it all. Last week we were talking about Wallace.
Yeah, we'll do some more Wallace.
And a lot of things have come out in the news, and much has come out about mysterious people associated with Arthur Bremer, the accused the man who was accused of shooting Governor Wallace, and he has apparently been following political candidates and political office holders around the country and around Canada and all over the place. There's so much to talk about. Why don't we get right into that? I guess. Do you want to tell what Dialogue Conspiracy is about and how long it's been about that? And
let's get off the usual format of what Dialogue Conspiracy or Assassination is about, and talk about a program that was on KGO this Friday morning. Jim Dunbar had Larry Abrams, who wrote a book with Gary Allen called None Dare Call It Conspiracy. And we've been on the air.
I've seen that.
Yeah, have you seen it?
I was mailed a copy of that by the local
John Birch Society. Yeah, that's right. This book, None Dare Call It Conspiracy, is very close to my opinion of how the government was overthrown. And I watched the program today because Abrams, somebody called up and thought Friday. Somebody thought that Dunbar was being antagonistic to Abrams in his questioning and putting down where is the conspiracy. And Abrams said, let me tell you that this is the first radio show in the United States that I've been invited on at all. You know, that they've sold between 2 and 3 million copies of this book or passed them out across the country, the Birch Society has. And that the Dunbar show, he was given about a half hour Friday morning, which was the first chance to use the word conspiracy. We've used the word assassination for 1 year for the reason that I feel that in order for the conspiracy to be successful, the conspiracy that they talk about in the book, None Dare Call It Conspiracy, had to have assassinations and murders. The power that they're talking about required a lot of dead bodies that were in the way of the conspiracy. And he didn't go into those bodies, but he mentioned on the program men that were part of the conspiracy like David Rockefeller, Henry Kissinger, and people in the news media like Paley from Columbia Broadcasting and Sarnoff and Salzberger from the New York Times, Mr. Heisel from Time Life, Richard Nixon, the ATT, and the bankers. And they asked him, Dunbar said, what is the danger to us if this conspiracy exists? This particular book centers on the Council of Foreign Relations, as you know, Phil.
None Dare Call It Conspiracy.
And it emphasizes the fact of John J. McCloy's connections to the World Bank and Allen Dulles and the law firms that represented Adolf Hitler and the ammunition industries in Europe and the United States. And Dunbar said to Abrams, what is the danger to us of this conspiracy, if it exists? And he said, the Americans keep going to the polls and want to make changes, and there's been no changes in 30 years. Now, the opinion of the John Birch Society, or the authors on this book, is much closer to what I've been saying and what I've said all along in terms of the conspiracy in the United States. It's interesting which side is coming out and using the word conspiracy now in a book, pushing a book and getting on the news media, because for example, local Democrats in this town have nothing to do with me. People like Peter Bisag or all the Democratic Party in this city have nothing to do with me in this local community when I talk about political assassinations or conspiracy. But the American Independent Party is much closer to my way of thinking in recognizing how the power shaped up in the last 30 years, and the book that they put together exactly right. So all I have to do with them in some way is link the actual guns and bullets to their theory, because my overall theory is exactly the same as theirs. And if I get in touch with these people and with that book, maybe there's a chance to really blow this thing open in 1972. They're pushing the word conspiracy a lot.
There was something which I know you're going to refer to because I know you've caught it, but I was surprised to see one of our presidential candidates, a black woman by the name of Shirley Chisholm, I was very surprised to see her comment on assassinations and the research surrounding the assassinations, and yet she did, and the story was reported nationwide that Shirley Chisholm has some doubts about what has been said about the assassinations so far.
That's right. She was on television in Los Angeles when she spoke in Long Beach, and I got a call from somebody right away who saw the show and told me about it. And then there were news broadcasts in Carmel on another station. I don't know if it came over your wire service or not.
Oh, yeah, we had it here.
But here she was saying, we'll open up the National Archives, and we'll talk about who killed John Kennedy, Robert Kennedy, and Martin Luther King. Now, Shirley says that both the parties are so much alike and don't represent truth. So here is a woman running for president, which is the first time. It is a black person, which is another first. And it is the first candidate for president in the United States to mention the assassinations as being a factor. A political campaign, eventually it will become the most important issue in the United States. That's what I said, back in June when we started here, that this is the one single main factor in the United States that links together all the things. If you worry about Amshipka or the bombings in Vietnam or the weapons or the surveillance of the data banks or the new Supreme Court decision on minority people can sit, they don't have to have an opinion, they can only observe. That was written up by Mr. White, Supreme Court Stewart this week. All the repressions that are coming down, eventually when you put it all together, you're going to date it to November 22nd, 1963, where the power structure lost its control temporarily with John Kennedy and gained it back when they killed him. They lost it for 1,000 days when Richard Nixon lost the election in 1960 as a member of the Council of Foreign Relations. And then they retrenched and manipulated a couple of deaths and were back swinging the controls. They had the control with Lyndon Johnson, and it was continuous.
Was Shirley Chisholm's statements a surprise to you?
Well, I was so excited because I had sent her about a week before, Shirley Chisholm and Bella Abzug and a man named Ryan and Dellums had come out for impeaching Richard Nixon due to the mining of the harbor. And I sent letters to them and said the mining is just a tip of the iceberg. It's nothing, It's the tit on the body. It's nothing. It's not the problem. The problem is how these people got into office and they have to be impeached. And that same week I sent out 119 letters regarding Hugo Pinnell and bringing in the chain of conspiracy from Washington down to our local community. I sent a letter to 119 members of Congress.
You got a response on that, too, from somebody called
Richard Nixon. And the Justice Department. We'll go into that letter if we have time. So the first candidate who was running for office to mention opening up the National Archives did it this week. And that brings conspiracy out on even a program as small as KGO, because that will make ripples. We have Shirley Chisholm coming out. And then there was another news broadcast, which was on Thursday night. Mort Saul was on television. It was late at night, and he was on a national program. And he was talking about a subject which had a news blackout, Jim Garrison. People keep saying, what's happening to Jim Garrison and what happened to the case down there, and Garrison was arrested. So the LA Times had what is a 2-inch article, not very big, but I have a copy of it here. And the New Orleans State Times had an article, and this is what it said. It said that Pershing Gervais, who was a federal informer, said he delivered payoffs to Jim Garrison about illegal gambling case because he was forced to trap Garrison by harassment of the Justice Department. The Justice Department made Gervais hand money that was marked to Garrison to trap him. And he's in Canada now. Pershing Gervais is going to become another one of what I call my heroes, in my newsletter, and we'll go into that some more later. In the ilk of, say, Marchetti of the CIA or Louis Tackwood of the L.A. Police Department, Frank Martinez of the L.A. Police Department, Larry Shears, Ellsberg, people are surfacing and telling the truth. And now Gervais is saying that he was offered a job with General Motors in Canada and protection by the Justice Department of the United States to frame Garrison. The Justice Department is supposed to investigate crimes, not frame people, so the conspiracies roll along. Now, I was writing yesterday, I was doing some writing, and I was looking into my files because I wanted a reference to the plan to kill Nixon, which came out in the news several years ago. It was a Yemenite family, and in 1968, a man was approached to come in on a deal to kill Richard Nixon, which would take place a few years later.
You have an article in your hand, several articles.
Yeah, I brought those.
Those are from what it looks like the New York Times.
New York Times, and one's from the San Francisco Chronicle. And a man who used to be an informer in California when he worked as a fruit picker. He was a paid informer for on narcotics peddlers and prostitutes. He was asked by a gentleman in New York City to participate in a plan to kill Richard Nixon. And they said that if he joined the plot, there'd be a lot of money. They were already sending $2,000 a month overseas to be stacked in a bank. This was in 1968, and the assassination wasn't going to take place till much later. But I came across something which was really interesting in the article on the plot to kill Nixon. They were supposed to wait till America had its most violence-ridden year. And then the Americans would be told that Richard Nixon's opponent was slain in the same circumstances, and then they would kill Nixon. Now, isn't that the script we see with Wallace that we talked about last week, that the killing of Wallace is to set the stage for Richard Nixon? Now, and I didn't even remember that in my filing cabinets back from 68, I just keep a file on evidence of various plots to kill Richard Nixon, that this particular man said that the plot, part of the plot was that Nixon would be killed following the slaying of one of his opponents. So that was in 1968, and I pulled that out.
Do you think that plan still exists somewhere?
Well, you know what happened? This is very interesting. The New York Times, and again, the Council of Foreign Relations, this book, None Dare Call It Conspiracy, refers to members of the New York Times, James Reston, Walter Lippmann, certain writers are in on these conspiracies and keep the truth from being told. What happened was the man and his two sons that were supposed to be on the plot to kill Richard Nixon were arrested, and then the New York Times carried full stories discrediting the informer. And they said the informer just had a bad temper, or the informer was kicked out of the apartment of the man who he was telling about, or that he drank whiskey, and that these men are Muslims and don't drink whiskey. Therefore, the informer is wrong, and the arrested were acquitted. And that was the end of the plot. See, and New York Times.
Do you think they were acquitted by the newspaper?
Well, the court. They went to court.
I mean, but by the information which the New York Times revealed.
See, well, they didn't go into the fact the man who informed and squealed about the plan to kill Richard Nixon, who wanted to save Richard Nixon's life, was connected with intelligence agencies overseas. He was an intelligence agent. He worked with the spy systems. They didn't say whether it worked with the Friends of the Middle East or the CIA. He worked with our Narcotics Bureau in California, and he was a reputable intelligence agent. And when these men came to him and wanted to include him in the plot, he informed the federal government, and his reward was that he was put down as crazy. And the men, they had M16 rifles in their room, and they had carbines, and they had all kinds of weapons. And these men said, well, you know, we're going back to Palestine soon, and you need these weapons there. There's not enough of them for us there. So they justified the ownership of all the weapons, and all they were arrested for was keeping knives with switchblades, which was illegal in New York. But they broke the credibility of the informer and said that he just simply didn't like the hospitality and used to drink. And the informant was broken down, and the guilty were acquitted. And that was the end of the plot. They never went into the money that was salted away in the old country or did any investigation on that at all. But the part of the plot was to kill Nixon's opponent and then follow it with Nixon. Now, that in Dialogue Conspiracy and with Assassination, I talk about the Lewis Tackwood plans of the Los Angeles Police Department to kill Richard Nixon. And the way the media covers it is this. Friday's paper has an article about Bremer being up in Canada and being stalking Richard Nixon and staying with close range of Richard Nixon before he shot at Wallace. And the San Jose Mercury has an article disproving any political motivation in the attempt to shoot Wallace, because if he wanted Humphrey and he wanted Nixon and he wanted Wallace, then all he wanted was attention. See, the Friday version of the San Jose Mercury says, being as he wanted Nixon and Humphrey and Wallace, it seems that all he wanted was public attention.
Who's making that statement?
The New York Times service is again discrediting the fact there could be a conspiracy in the fact that Mr. Bremer is a few feet from Richard Nixon in Canada. They discredit the fact that somebody may want him to shoot at Nixon later, or the fact that if he shoots Wallace, he's gaining Nixon's votes, so that he's still in power with the Southern strategy. Maybe this is a little complicated in terms of political gains or loses, but they're breaking down the credibility of your Bremer being part of a conspiracy. Like the same New York Times news service said that Bremer was at the Waldorf Astoria Hotel, and we'll go into that, where he spent the night. He was there April 7th and 8th, and he spent the night there, and Humphrey was supposed to be in that hotel on the 9th for a 2-day stay. Well, he left there. He was there 2 days. He left there the day that Humphrey was supposed to arrive. Now, the fact that he checked in the Waldorf Astoria Hotel, which is the most expensive, most famous hotel in the United States, one of the most famous in the world, the fact that this man stayed there April 7th and 8th doesn't cause the New York Times to wonder, who did he see at the Waldorf Hotel? You see, Spiro Agnew has an apartment on the 7th floor there, and so do a lot of other people. And if you want Agnew to be president, how do you know, how can they say that he stayed there because Humphrey was coming? If they wanted to have a meeting with him, just in case somebody saw him walk into the Waldorf, they could time it at the time that Humphrey had reservations, just to say he was after Humphrey. It hides what Bremer was really doing at the Waldorf Astoria Hotel. And these are the things that people have to ask themselves. The very fact that he had the money or stayed there, if he stayed there, the loner, checked in one of the most expensive hotels in the United States, checks in a room, sits alone, and leaves the day before Humphrey gets there, that's really stalking Humphrey. But the way the news takes it, they twist it all around. Therefore he's after Humphrey.
Yeah, it's not necessarily, one does not necessarily follow the other. How did the government or whoever found out that Bremer had been tailing other candidates? It came through, I see a couple of photographs attached to this. I've seen other photographs. It was through examination of crowd photographs.
Well, this is the way I point to a federal conspiracy of a high order in our Justice Department, just like the people that framed Garrison. When Bremer was arrested, there were various things in his rooms and his coat pockets and things, and among them was a stub or gasoline ticket of having been in Canada. Now, the very first day, within 24 hours of searching, they could have said he was in Canada. And somebody has pursued, and the Secret Service has blown up pictures of the crowd that was taken while Nixon was in Ottawa, Canada, and have a picture of Bremer just a few feet away from him. But I think that the minute the assassination attempt took place at Wallace, the Canadian borders and the Mexican borders could be checked to see if Bremer crossed. You use your name. He's checked in and used his name around. So far, there's no alias. So if they want... See, the investigation is forced upon them, and then they cover it up. They don't want the investigation. When I say they, I use an example of... a perfect example that was in the news was that we talked about last week. There was a getaway car, and a suspect was caught after Wallace was shot in Maryland on the highway, a powder blue car. And the excuse for having that suspect, remember, Phil, was that he was changing license plates and that he wasn't involved in the crime.
Right.
And I talked about that last week on the meaning of why did you stop a man who's changing license plates at a time like this. And he was described very carefully as being 6 feet, 2 inches tall, weighing about 220 pounds. Well, this week we have Mr. Bremer going across Michigan from Kalamazoo over to Milwaukee, and he's on a ferry boat. And the man who sells the tickets remembers Bremer very well, describes him, and tells about the people that he was with, because there was a man in the back of his car, and then he was with another man. And the man at the ferry crossing says that he took note of Bremer because of the political talk, and that he was with a man who was 6'2" and weighed 220 pounds. Now, up in Michigan, at the ferry crossing, he's with a swarthy man with dark hair who seems to be Greek with a New York accent, who is 6'2", weighs 220 pounds. The police in Maryland, unbeknownst, to the Michigan man talking, but this is the police job. See, this isn't Mae Brussell's job. This is up to the FBI to take the man to Maryland, because if they had him as a suspect and let him go, they have a police log with his name, description, and weight, and what he was doing, right? His driver's license. All they have to do is find that man between now and next week, take him up to Michigan, and ask the man at the ferry crossing, was this the man that was with Bremer? And that's a conspiracy, because there's two people. The police had a suspect and let him go, and far away in another state, a man is giving the physical description that's identical to the police suspect. And he not only is giving the description, but he's giving a New York accent or a geographical location that he seems to come from, and you have Bremer checked in New York at the hotel that Spiro Agnew lives in. So you have a whole net there that isn't followed through yet. And then you had another interesting thing. The alleged assassin has a brother. And that came out in the news this week. James Earl Ray had a brother, and when they arrested Ray, there were all kinds of concealment about his sister and his family and misinformation. And it turned out much later, a year or two later, that James Ray's brother works for Stoner of the States' Rights Party, a very right-wing organization, a kind that wouldn't mind helping see Martin Luther King killed with the help of a few federal authorities. He works with Stoner, Ray's brother. Well, in this case, it turns out that, and Ray's brother had visited him the day before he left the Missouri Penitentiary, and the next day, James Ray got out of the penitentiary. He had a Social Security card under the name of Raines, and he was able to get employment right away in Illinois because he had ID on him, which you can't get while you're sitting in a penitentiary. You can't duplicate Social Security cards with alleged names or aliases. So he was out and on his way. Well, in this case, we have a brother now. Mr. Bremer has a brother, and the brother is under federal investigation. He's with federal authorities in Florida and in Texas. He's been under federal investigation. Now, the excuse of apprehending his brother, Roger, was that he had some reducing salons that he advertised that didn't, in fact, exist. But the key states in every conspiracy, if you get, or that coroner in L.A., that Canada is involved, Florida is involved, Texas is involved. They're running out of scripts. The banks and the Bahamas and Jamaica, everything is left. Only thing left is a ticket to the Bahamas for this particular guy. But the key cities, some way or other, always fit in. So I don't have much about Brother Roger yet, but he is in touch with federal authorities because they say it's an indictment, but it's interesting. It's on the reducing thing, but he travels between Florida and Texas, Brother Roger. It's getting a little...
Has been to Mexico recently?
No, he hasn't been to Mexico yet, but he's in Canada. So next week, maybe he'll be in Mexico, since we met last week, and we did. A lot of people who heard this show maybe didn't hear the one, and it's a shame. It should be a continuous series of the path of the alleged assassins that are not lone assassins or loners in any sense of the word. Just to give a brief resume of last week's show, the cover story about Bremer was that he was a loner and a misfit. I was out at Pacific Grove High this week talking to a large group of kids, and only one out of maybe couple of hundred knew the term cover story, and the complaint has been many times that I move along on these shows and use references to things that people assume, I assume they know, and I take it for granted they know. I did this last week. I referred to Bullet 399. If Wallace went to the Army hospital, they duplicate the Bullet 399, and I got a call right away at home, like, what does that mean? It's a whole vernacular of its own, because there's a whole book on that subject. So the cover story, for those who didn't hear the show last week, is that Mr. Bremer is a loner, a misfit. He wants to be famous. He wants a place in history. He doesn't talk to his ma. He doesn't talk to his pa. He doesn't have meaningful relationships. He has no girlfriends. The cover story is the story the news media puts out that has no basis in fact for the evidence of where he worked, how he earned his money, who he saw, his mobility.
Sometimes unwittingly, though. Sometimes because the news media puts that cover story out because that's what they're given to believe as the facts.
I don't believe that, Phil. The cover story comes out very swiftly for some particular purpose. Now, a magazine like Life magazine and Life and Time are part of the conspiracies, and to keep the people under control by putting out misinformation. You see, when valuable information comes out in details of Lee Harvey Oswald, in the Soviet Union and his security clearances and his connections to Navy intelligence. Life doesn't do a story on that, and researchers have the name of the chain of command of people who stop it. Life has a purpose, and they tell you, Lifetime, New York Times just tells you so much. You get a few honest reporters who come up once in a while, and in trying to do a good job, they'll give you certain information. But the main editorial office gives you a real cover story. This week, Life has a picture, because we were told that Bremer's room was messy. So there's a picture of a man standing in a room with some garments of clothes on the floor. And have you ever seen this, Phil? It's a really funny issue. It is worth, people should really buy it. It's May 26, 1972. And the cover story is 2 big pages, The Boy Who Shut Everyone Out. And his mother claims that he probably shot Wallace because he doesn't like the summertime, and if he's arrested or in jail, then the sun won't get on his skin because it's sensitive. And then she thinks it over, and she says, no, it has to be something he ate. It just had to be something he ate because maybe the sun isn't right for him. And then she has a real conclusion. No, it isn't what he ate, but maybe, she says, maybe, it's one of those false cigarettes. She says, you know what I mean? She doesn't want to say the word. She says, I don't want to say the word, see. He couldn't stand regular cigarette. Maybe that made him mad, cigarette smoke, but she thinks, like maybe that false stuff, like the grass, but she won't say it, see, because that's a no-no. Then they have a picture of Dad grinning and looking cross-eyed, and they go into the fact that Dad has his little home, 2-family home, where the paint is peeling off, but his son has moved into an expensive apartment for $138 a month. He's living well beyond the family's means now. And there's a picture of Dad. That's a cover story. Because if I can do research, in Carmel Valley without any investigative agencies and come out with a show or an explanation better than they've got, then they're just doing a cover story. Because there's been a lot of facts and information.
Yeah, but you're lumping when you say that the news media is putting out these cover stories intentionally. You're lumping all the news media together, and of course there are newspapers and our radio stations and. I don't know of any TV stations yet, but there are various segments in the news media, small publications, computer and automation, that are really part of the news media, but maybe they're not the news establishment.
Oh, if I didn't think there was a chance to get across to all kinds of people in spite of the news control. Dunbar asked Abrams about this news control. How does this affect you?
That's this morning on the show?
Friday morning. He asked him, how does the New York Times or Life or Time keep control so the truth of the conspiracy doesn't come out? He said, well, what they're doing with me is, for one thing, they've had a review of my book in the New York Times for a month, a copy of it, and it has already sold 2 million copies more than The Godfather. But they pretend it doesn't exist. No one in the major media talks about it. It's not on the bestseller list. It doesn't make the bestseller list. Then he said that there are 2 agencies in San Francisco that control all the paperback books, and they skim them, and they make the conditions. If you send them out, you have to pay for the full thing in 90 days, and we'll sell back. You have to buy back everything we don't sell, and they make the conditions so hard. He was asked, how come the Birch Society is the only one that sells this book? And these stands control what gets to the book stands. There's a book that Avon Press is going to do on Louis Tackwood, the Glass House tapes on the L.A. Police Department, and how they plan conspiracies and how they, the killing of Nixon and framing people in San Quentin and the death row that didn't commit the crimes, and they pay agents to commit violence. We'll see if that book is reviewed in the New York Times or Life or Time. See, these books sell, but they're not reviewed. Jim Garrison's book is into his second printing. It's in the paperback. It's selling by word of mouth, and we can talk on it.
Okay, this is Dialogue Conspiracy with research specialist Mae Brussell. We'll identify the station. This is KLRB, FM, Carmel, stereo serving you 24 hours a day. Of course, Mae, when you talk about the control of the news media, you might even destroy your own credibility here on the air.
Oh, no. I want to make this very clear. I have worked very hard, for 9 years doing research on assassinations. And if I didn't think I could get it out to the people in some form, I'm not going to meet people all over the country. I don't even leave Carmel Valley. I don't even like to leave my house. So I know that the media has to pass the message. And I got a letter this week, it was picked up, it came to the station here, about them replaying that broadcast to New York City, that 5-hour broadcast on WBAI.
You were interviewed on WBAI, and they had a telephone hookup where you could talk to the listeners of WBAI, which is the Pacifica station in New York City.
That's for 5 hours, and
5 hours long distance.
And we got a letter there, and what the man wrote, it was really good. Did you get a chance to read the letter?
Yeah.
He said, I couldn't believe I was hearing this on the radio. And he said, I mean, it took him by surprise. He said, I always felt there were conspiracies or links, and that the link of Vietnam, it will end up in Dallas, the reason of the escalation of the war. But he was sitting in New York City, and they replayed a 5-hour broadcast. And so the media, when I put down the control, we're talking about the Council of Foreign Relations, New York Times, Life and Time, the major CBS, NBC, Associated Press.
Just the small ones.
But,
I
have confidence that the small ones can get it together, and that people will, be able to get this thing together. And this is what they were talking about in pushing this book along on None Dare Call It Conspiracy, is that it's an educational process of getting information to people. They don't have to believe it. They don't have to accept it or reject it, but they should at least read it.
I'm wondering how many people are out there right now. It would be interesting to me if people that are listening now would indicate in a very simple way just, that they are listening, because it's hard when we're sitting here doing the program, aside from the phone calls we get and the occasional letters asking questions, but, people are not prone to writing letters or to calling, I would never call a radio station. I wouldn't think of it unless there's something very unusual to say to a radio station. I think of people who are listening now, if they just drop a postcard to the station and say, I listened to Dialogue Conspiracy. It's
hard for them to do it.
Even that. We'll see how many we get. I want to get some indication.
I want you to say, I listen and I understand what you're saying. I may not agree, or even I agree.
Let's try it. Let's just do it with just that short mention. If you listen to the program, if you're a new listener, just indicate you're a new listener, and if you're a regular listener over the past months, indicate regular. And
I think it's right to ask, because I think stations like this that have stood their neck out for 1 year, when 1 year ago was the most unpopular subject in the world, and now Shirley Chisholm is the first candidate, and this thing of the Justice Department, framing Garrison, it's going to be in the news more and more. When you get it on the radio Friday morning, I keep saying this, Friday morning, of the Dunbar thing, talking conspiracy, people are going to have to begin to open up, and once they do it, they don't have to begin, but it's an interesting subject.
Well, let's put the challenge.
Phil wants you to write to me.
Let's put the challenge to the listeners that are listening now.
If you listen,
send a postcard to Dialogue Conspiracy, KLRB, Carmel.
Yeah, I know they're listening.
93921. I know that a certain number of them are listening too. Let's just see if we can get some indication on paper.
Okay, and
we've had other indications before. Let's not downgrade the program or the listeners.
No.
Let's try it that way and see how many postcards we get. KLRB, Box 3904 in Carmel. Okay, on with the subject matter.
That's it. Okay, they can send in their subscriptions, too, to Conspiracy Newsletter if they want. That's 595 Broadway, New York City, in care of the Realist.
That's the new newsletter that you'll be putting out.
New York 10012, yeah. Starting July 1st, there'll be a small newsletter on Conspiracy Newsletter, it's called, and it will give names of books to read and information and facts and data that we can't repeat each week on the show as we go along, but as it's printed up, they'll begin to save it and collect it.
Why don't you give the address again and the price?
595 Broadway, New York City, 10012. $8 a year. You get 6 issues of The Realist every other month, and newsletter is every other week. So that includes The Realist and the Conspiracy Newsletter. I like to tell people to get The Realist, too, because Paul Krasner is going to be writing about Charlie Manson, and there's an article in there about Richard Nixon that I did, and there are articles of political interest to the conspiracy, so I don't like to break the subscription into buy The Realist or buy the Conspiracy Newsletter. If you have 5, you can get 8, or split it with a friend and each put in 4 and get the whole thing, because it all ties together. I made a promise 2 weeks ago that I don't like to break promises on this show, Phil, and it was 3 weeks ago, I made a promise to talk about a contract to kill Eldridge Cleaver by the Treasury Department, that they were making a deal. And I wanted to talk about that, and then before we could do it, 2 weeks ago, J. Edgar Hoover was assassinated. We barely scratched it. I could do more. I talked about why
People
I thought...
who didn't hear that program are saying assassinated?
By the CIA. I thought J. Edgar Hoover was killed. In the last 2 weeks, I've talked to so many people that have thought that the circumstances of his death were really funny. Patrick Gray this week came out and said, no, I don't want that $30,000 armored car or 24-hour surveillance around the clock. You know, he lives at home with a bunch of kids and a family. I don't need all that. Well, if J. Edgar Hoover had 24-hour surveillance around the house, how was it he was alone from 8 o'clock at night until he was taken to the mortuary and there was no autopsy? And again, that goes into the reasons that Richard Nixon was outvoted in the White House because of his loyalty to Hoover, to hold on to him. And the War Council did not want him as the head of the FBI, and you couldn't remove him when he was alive. The evidence, again, we'll go back to that another day. And then the following week was the Walker shooting, Wallace shooting. So
Walker was a few years ago.
General Walker. That's tied into the Wallace. But we skipped for 3 weeks, 2 weeks. I didn't do a discussion that I wanted to do, and I'm going to jump away from the Wallace because I promised to get this on the air. And it involves a tape recording. I typed up the conversation. I had a copy of the tape in my home. It was played on KPFK in Los Angeles over the air, and I played it. It was taken down as it went on the air, and I played it in my home and then typed it up so I'd have a written copy because it's easier for me to read the script than to listen to the tape and pull it out all the time. But this is a tape. The voices on it, one of them is Larry Shears, and Shears surfaces as an agent of the Department of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms of the Treasury Department because he was supposed to be he had knowledge of the plan to kill Cesar Chavez. And he blew his cover at the time because he exposed the conspiracy that was going to kill Cesar Chavez. So Shears made a tape, and to prove for KPFK that the Treasury Department was in on it, he called up a man in the Treasury Department who was his contact man. Shears was a contact man with the Treasury Department so that they could hear his conversation on the phone to know that the Treasury was in on it, you see. So you have the voice of the Treasury Department, and you have Larry Shears, and they're talking about this subject. Shears says to this agent, would you believe that Sonny Barger took the bait? Sonny Barger, for those of you who don't know, is a member of the Hells Angels. He was the ex-president of the Hells Angels Club, and he has been under arrest for various charges, and he was also involved up in the Altamont, the Rolling Stones concert, Belvin Belli. That's another conspiracy trip, a show on the Rolling Stones concert, and the killing that was photographed close up to show the world how violent the hippies are at their music scenes. He was the ex-president of the Hells Angels. Larry Shears is saying, the contact man, would you believe that Sonny Barger took the bait? Sonny Barger wants to give you Eldridge Cleaver. And the contact man says at the Treasury Department, did you talk that over? Shears, yeah, Sonny is going to call me directly. And I've been using as a go-between between this point. And he will call me between 11 or 12 o'clock tonight, and he wants some answers. Can you go? Now, the tape that was played at KPFK is between Larry Shears and the Treasury Department. It was not the voice of Sonny Barger. They're talking about Barger. And the man said, it depends what he wants to know, Larry. And Larry says he's on a federal bail jump rap, and he wants to stay on the streets bad, and he will give you Eldridge. And Treasury says, what does he want? What does he want from this? He wants to give you Eldridge, and he wants to offer him up dead. You know that, don't you? And the Treasury says, I don't give a damn if he's alive or if he's dead. We'll take him. Shears says he's subject to being dead when you get him, and perhaps, I don't know. And then on KPFK, Shears is talking to him again, and he explains on the radio station. He said, Sonny Barger was on a federal bail jump rap for various narcotics charges, and he was going to go to jail. And the people in his group of the Hells Angels were going to go to jail. And this was a last-ditch effort. Larry Shears says, when I first started working in the State Department of Narcotics, through various channels and various people, and you can back this up, including Barger, he said, I will turn in evidence on various things, and I will turn in evidence if you make a deal to get my people and these charges dropped. Now, Larry Shears used to be part of a biking group, and he knew them very well, and Barger had confidence in him. What the result would be that Barger would get a minor hand slap, and he would walk out. Shears went on, and he says, the one thing I can do, Barger says, I'll put people on a boat or a train or a plane and go to Algiers, and I have Barger on the same tape telling me how he'll go on a boat or a train or a plane and put him in a box and ship him back. He said, I won't even try to save him alive. There's no way in God's green earth I'm even going to try it. I will deliver him to you dead if you want him that way. And this went all the way up to the point where the Treasury Department had accepted the offer, and they were going to fly Shears down to confirm and firm up the arrangements. And then there was a hang-up on the insurance reasons of this transaction. And Barger said he had a lot of faith in Larry Shears setting up the thing. And he said he didn't care about, I won't use the cuss words that are in the script that they use. Well, they use on KPFK. I guess I can use them here, right? If it's done. Where he says, I don't give a damn. You know, he used this kind of, well, they used it down there. I can use the words. He says, I can set up this damn thing and go and carry it through. In other words, I would go down and let them take it out of my hands. Shears wouldn't have to do it. He wouldn't have to deal with these people. Barger would do the arrangements to bring Cleaver home dead, and the Treasury Department gave the full approval. Shears went on to say that at this time, this FBI stepped in and cooled the whole damn thing off. It wasn't appropriate at the time. They weren't ready for it. And they stopped it, and they got everybody pacified and cooled down. The FBI said, no, we won't go in now and do it this way. But the Treasury Department had accepted the deal. And the important thing is this, that when you talk about violence, and that Bremer is violent, or he's a lone assassin, or that the news media plays up assassinations and encourage other assassins, the point I'm trying to make is that the government plans assassinations. The heads of the government are the violent ones. I've put this in letters to people in Washington. I say it on the air. I say it in my writings. The violent ones are the Treasury Department, the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The fact that they saved Cleaver that time doesn't mean the Federal Bureau of Investigations is an honest organization. They should have arrested Sonny Barger and put him in jail for the narcotics rap. They don't, Barger's still off, but he didn't bring home Cleaver. And Treasury Department was making the arrangements for the death. And so Larry Shears went on, and he had gave this interview because of the Cesar Chavez thing. And he began to worry about the plan to kill Chavez. And the announcer at KPFK said, why are you telling these stories now? Do you want to make a lot of money off of it, and what do you get out of this by telling these stories? And Shears says he wants it to be a public service. He said this whole damn thing, exposing the plan to kill Cleaver, the plan to kill Chavez, he says the whole damn thing has been a public service at my expense. I'm damn sick and tired of promises the alcohol, tobacco, and firearms makes from these people in the Treasury Department. I have no faith, and I can't keep promises to my family. And Jerry, that's the radio announcer down there, he says, you know what I'm talking about. As far as this Chavez thing exposing, he means the plan to kill Chavez. I don't make one nickel out of it. I don't intend to, and I don't see any money in it. And I've already turned loose 99% of the information I have, and I will continue to do it for two reasons. One, I told you, is for my own personal protection, to get these people off the streets that are doing these things, get them properly taken care of. I'm not saying my word is worth a lot, or that it would help a hell of a lot, because he said, I'm going to leave California post-haste as soon as possible. This is Larry Shears. Then he said, I don't know Cesar Chavez. I don't know Cesar Chavez. I never met the man. But too goddamn many people, these are his words on that tape, he says, too many people are beginning to get shot and killed around here. Even though politically I may not agree with him, meaning Chavez, I was just concerned that this was something that had to be done. Seriously, I'm not an idealist or anything like that, really. I had mercenary motives when he went into this, but why should I sit by idly and watch another guy get killed? As far as I know, he said, Cesar Chavez may be doing a hell of a lot of good. And now I sit here and I'm giving it a lot of thought, and I'm wondering if there weren't a whole lot of people out there like me who could have helped and didn't. It was a very moving interview. That's the end of the interview. It was down in L.A. on KPFK. The news media, again, the news control, talked about a plan to kill Cesar Chavez. Evel Younger, the Attorney General, comes in and says there was no proof that this conspiracy existed. It was very moving to hear the original tape. I can get it for you if you want to play it up here sometime, Phil. Maybe
why don't we bring it in for one of the shows?
Okay, maybe I should have brought the direct tape. But I like to interject that what he's saying here is, I'm wondering if there weren't a whole lot of people out there who could have helped that didn't. Now, I've been out on a limb. I've stuck my neck out. People know, like my life is in danger. So is anybody else who speaks up. But there are many, many people who can join me, like Pershing Gervais, who Thursday night came out and said the Justice Department planted stuff on Jim Garrison, that they're out to get him. I feel badly about it. I was offered asylum in Canada. I was offered money. Here's Larry Shears coming along and saying, the Treasury Department wanted to kill Cleaver, and they wanted to kill Chavez. And I've given up, my chance there. I've blown my cover. I've worked for them so many years. Too many people are getting killed, and I don't agree with them. But they should have a right to live. And this gets back to the philosophical thing, if we get away from some of the factual information, is that a lot of people don't understand. Again, I can work, say, with the American Independent Party or the Wallace people and show them a conspiracy to kill Wallace where I think the facts are, because I don't agree with them politically at all, and they wouldn't agree with me, mostly because I don't belong to any political party. I wouldn't line up with anyone except where they want truth. I can belong to Shirley Chisholm's party and the American Independent, because this week they both have talked about conspiracy. And I know a conspiracy exists. I can give my facts to Shirley. I can give them to Mr. Monteith in California. The facts are true. And both political parties at the opposite ends of the spectrum will someday get together and find they have been a power structure at the above.
Monteith is running for Congress in the 12th District, the American Independent Party. Just wanted to identify
him. Oh, yeah, that's
him.
a good... Yeah, I throw these names around. But I can communicate with Monteith or with members of Shirley Chisholm's group. I haven't talked to her. Because in between, I know that too many people are being ripped off. And when we put together the material of Louis Tackwood and Larry Shears and Frank Martinez, the informer in L.A., and Ellsberg, and I keep repeating these names, I want you to know them. There are many people working in areas where a lot of killing is going on and a framing of people molding the news media story. And when these people surface and get together, we'll all sit together and we will look at the Council of Foreign Relations, Henry Kissinger, and the group that controls the White House, Richard Helms and Richard Nixon, and show how they usurped the power.
I'm going to throw things, as long as you mention Dr. Kissinger, I might throw something at you which I haven't talked to you about before, and it's sort of maybe an anecdote. It may have no meaning whatsoever, but a story came out, about a week ago about Dr. Kissinger, and it had to do with what would be the word? A weirdism of Dr. Kissinger, and that is that although Dr. Kissinger will speak for the record, and although he will allow himself to be photographed, and although he will provide written transcripts of his press conferences, he will not allow sound film to be shot. In other words, motion pictures with sound, nor will he allow radio newsmen to record his voice. In other words, there are no tapes of Henry Kissinger's voice because he won't allow it.
Well, maybe he's going to turn into another Howard Hughes. Maybe they'll replace him with a group of people, and they're catching on like they want your voice and they can't play the voice box. Maybe there's a reason. Does he give many speeches on television where you could have a cassette and take his voice?
No, you just never hear his voice. If you'll think back, have you ever heard Henry Kissinger speak?
Well, I know that Henry Kissinger, to answer that, is one of the most dangerous super spies. If anything was to prove my theory of conspiracy and how the government is controlled, it's the walking Henry Kissinger. The other one you never hear is his twin cousin down in Texas, Walter Rostow. He was the official babysitter for Lyndon Johnson, who's down there, rewriting American history, Texas style, of what happened during the Johnson era. See, that was a little interim from Dallas, when Nixon lost in 1960, you had a little incursion there until we got back on the path with Nixon again. You know, he was our vice president for 8 years, and these Allen Dulles and John Foster Dulles controlled the State Department and the intelligence agencies, and they were bringing in the whole Nazi operation. And there was that little incursion or fluke where Kennedy won, you know. So he had 1,000 days to make it and off with his head.
Yeah, well, I'm just wondering about this.
No, I don't know anything about The Voice, but I do know that...
It's very interesting. And
it's interesting that you point out, and I think you should keep bringing these things out, because these are spooky people.
Well, one of the reasons given for Kissinger, one of the justifications for him not being recorded, or one of the reasons that was given as maybe his motive, was that he has a very heavy German accent still.
You better believe it.
And he's very sensitive about that.
He's got a heavy German head, too. I don't mean to cast any aspersions on one particular group, but on the other hand, I cannot forget how many Germans have been incorporated into our State Department, into our defense intelligence agencies, into the ammunition deposits, the Southwest in Florida, Muscle Shoals, Alabama, Florida, Texas, California, and Ohio. Those are the warfare states. Our alleged assassins move in those geographical areas. Their contacts are in those areas. There's a lot of links to the Nazis that came over, and it's hard for me to separate when you use the term German. It's like using the term FBI. Everybody who's an agent in that agency isn't involved in the conspiratorial sense, or everyone who's in the CIA, we're not sure, is involved in the insidious, you know, he may just be earning a living, the petty informer or a major informer. Not everyone in every agency is involved in crimes against the people of the country by overthrowing the government.
There are probably some decent, well, I think it goes without saying that the FBI does serve a purpose that, you know, many times serves the nation and the people, and the same with the CIA, and same with the Los Angeles Police Department or the Monterey Police Department.
Yeah. But I didn't know about Kissinger. It'd be interesting to know just how much German his voice does have in it. But
we were talking about police departments and the fact that they serve people. This story came out Friday, and this is unrelated really to conspiracies, but it's an interesting story, and it has to do with law enforcement. There was a there is a controversy raging in London right now about a book aimed at children which says "Never trust a copper." It's a quote, and it's called The Children's Bust Book.
Oh, my.
And it's published by the magazine Children's Rights. And the publication tells children that police are not trustworthy, that helping them is hurting you, that the law is not interested in truth, and that cooperation with all legal or social authorities will help convict you if you're in trouble with the law.
That's terrible.
And this is out in England now. That's their idea, at least this publication's idea, is what law enforcement's about.
No, that I don't approve of at all. I believe in law enforcement, and I'm trying, you know, to work night and day within the system if it's possible, to use the system if it can still work. If it can't work, then you go to other methods, but you work within the system.
We mentioned Hugo Pannell and the Justice Department. Do you want to? I think that's definitely worth mentioning.
Yeah.
We have about
a few minutes left.
7-8 minutes.
I'm going to have some parties here on the peninsula, some fundraising parties for Hugo Pinnell to get his own attorney. He had a public defender in his last trial. He was convicted. This week the sentence was 15 years for killing a guard, and I believe that Hugo Pinnell is innocent and that he was framed on that charge. And he didn't have a fair trial. The transcript will show it. He didn't have a fair trial, and he was not allowed to have the lawyer that he wanted. So Hugo was forced to take the public defender who allowed no evidence in the court to prove Hugo's innocence. The trial was an outrage. So he's going to file an appeal. He has 60 days, so I'm going to be announcing on the radio at various times. I'm going to try to get a concert here and a lecture. Maybe Paul Krasner said he'd come down and we'd have a series of lectures and potluck dinners and try to raise, we have to raise around $5,000 to get Faye Stender is considering taking his case, or Mr. Caldwell up north. There's two very fine attorneys, and everyone starts saving their money and get jobs this summer and help defend Hugo Pinnell. But I did send letters, wires to Congressmen I talked about before, and 119 letters to members of the House of Representatives, and I got a letter this week from the U.S. Department of Justice, and it wasn't the usual form letter you get from them. It was signed by David Norman, Assistant Attorney General of the Civil Rights Division, and Mikhail Hubbard, supervisory trial attorney of the criminal section of the Justice Department, those two departments. And it says that President Nixon has referred them to my telegram and message concerning the trial of Hugo Pannell, and that they want to determine whether violations of federal criminal civil rights are involved in Hugo's case, and that they said they can take no action unless I give them specific information. And because of the case number on the left-hand corner in the nature, you can see this particular letter. If I give them evidence of the violation of Hugo's federal criminal civil rights, I expect them to take action and not cover. He has a case number now, and Richard Nixon has come into this case, and I am very happy after doing so much work all these years on particular conspiracies and coming all the way down from the top down to our prison system, that the President of the United States has taken note to answer, and the Justice Department will take action. So I have been in contact with people, Hugo's mother, to get in touch with his lawyer, and various people at the trials, and we're making a list of every violation of a federal criminal right that Hugo Pannell had from the time he was arrested on a trumped-up rape charge. He's been in jail 14 years out of his 28 years in life, and I'm getting a list of the federal criminal civil rights laws, and the fact that the Justice Department and the Civil Rights Division in the criminal section have a file number now. We will list those and ask them to take action against the guards at Soledad, against the guards in San Quentin, against the prison system, and see if we can get the warden or assistant warden Parks or Pecunia in the system cleaned out just on this alone. And then I asked for another list of these same people, and I have 60 pages just that I wrote up of just notes that I took from 2 days at the trial. I'm making a list of the human rights of Hugo Pannell that were taken away, because I know these slick lawyers that stick within the framework that this is a federal criminal civil right. Some of those, like not receiving mail for months, is a civil right, but there are human rights, such as clubbing him on the head when he's chained to a chair in the witness of the prison officials and knocking his tooth out. Then when he went to have it removed, it was all broken, and he asked for Novocaine, and they say, no, dogs like you, we have orders, you can't have Novocaine. So they took his tooth out with the pliers. And when a fellow who didn't want to observe this, who was in the dental office of the prison, didn't want to observe this, then he gets a demotion and a reprimand. So going back to the cell where he's chained and dragging himself in pain, and they're saying, die, dog, and they're kicking him, they clubbed out another tooth and broke that one on the way out after one tooth was removed. These are human rights. He's isolated now in a whole wing at San Quentin where nobody can see him, and they stand outside and call him baboon and nigger and ape and dog and why don't you die, and he's all alone in the whole wing of San Quentin with the guards calling him these names night and day. And I want Washington to put him where other people can witness what he's doing. They can say he hit a guard and no one sees it. They can say he commits suicide, nobody sees it. So I want the prison officials to take care of Hugo. So to wind up this hour, we could do a lot. We've jumped because we could
covered a lot of territory.
We've covered a lot of territory. I wish we had time to do some more on the death of Hoover, on the path of Bremer. In following the news this next week, I asked you before, save your newspaper articles of what happens with Bremer, and we'll analyze them carefully in the following week, the articles such as he's following Humphrey, therefore it wasn't a conspiracy. Save every article, and maybe we can talk about them out loud and share them, and I'll give you my interpretation. Then you take the news of the past week, whether it's about Patrick Gray or Bremer or Nixon, these different things, and I'll show you how I think it ties in with the conspiracy theory, the attempt of the government to kill Wallace at this time. And don't forget that I predict it's to set the stage for the killing of Richard Nixon. That the people are catching on, the media, the lower media, not the major, like KLRB, carries a show. The show has cassettes. The cassettes go all over. The underground press, like LA Free Press, the News Advocate, the Village Voice, the people are getting together, and in that event, you would have to cancel the elections in 72 or gain control. And the only way you can do that is by killing Richard Nixon and creating the chaos and anarchy to duplicate the military coup d'etat in Greece in 1967. The elections were to take place in June of 67, the first chance at Poffender for genuine democratic land reforms. And because the buildup the evidence was so great that Papandreou had a chance to win, they had to remove him and take the king and queen and everyone to boot, kick them out, and gain control in April 67. And that's been 5 years. There's no election and no sign of a democracy returning to Greece.
Yeah, that's a dialogue